Thank you. I think that's the first introduction I've gotten of a person who said, I didn't read the catalog for like 10 years. You know? The thing about being the author of the catalog is that it's kind of a depressing arc to your life, that the thing you did first is the bestseller, and you're working your way down from there for the rest of your life. But that's the way it is. So I want to really thank Rabbi Perlow and the community for welcoming me here. It's really great to be here with you. It's particularly special because Sid Schwartz is your, I think the founding rabbi, right? Yeah, founding rabbi. And Fred Dobbs was in between, right? So it's a kind of an illustrious group of rabbis and teachers, which I'm sure you are both aware of and actually very grateful for. But you know, my new book is called Judaism Disrupted, and Sid has been one of the people who have really been very involved in, I would say, disrupting Jewish life and really looking to innovate and to encourage and help synagogues to go in new directions and try new ways. So I'm sure you know this better than I do, but I certainly wanted to mention that. So probably you don't know, but there's this Jewish holiday coming soon. Why aren't you home cooking? That's what I want. A week from tomorrow night, we will gather with family and friends to celebrate one of the most widely observed Jewish rituals, the Passover Seder. The traditional Seder, as I'm sure you well know, begins with a series of rituals: the Kiddush over wine, the eating and dipping of vegetables, the breaking of the middle matzah, all leading up to the telling of the story of the Exodus. And before that can begin, in Seders with children, the youngest, or perhaps all the children, are placed center stage to ask 4 questions that have been carefully rehearsed in Hebrew school. Why? Before attempting to answer the question about the questions, I want to turn your attention to a paragraph earlier than the 4 questions in the Haggadah that I find a surprising beginning to the evening. Maybe you've noticed it as well. The paragraph is in Aramaic, the language that Jews spoke in the time that the Seder ritual was being put together. It's said in Aramaic because they wanted to make sure everybody could understand it. Even in those days, there were many Jews who weren't fluent in Hebrew. Holach ba'anya. This is the bread of affliction, referring to the matzah, which our ancestors ate in Egypt. All who are hungry, let them come and eat. All who are in need, let them join us in the celebration of Passover. Hashata Haka, in this moment, we are in exile. We are here in exile. Next year in the land of Israel. In this moment, we are slaves. Next year, we will be free. Reflecting on those words, I'm sure you want to ask the question, I thought Passover is the holiday that we celebrate our freedom, the exodus from Egypt. Why then do we begin the Seder by saying we are slaves? And I thought matzah is the food that the Israelites didn't have enough time to let the bread rise, and therefore they carried the matzah with them as they left Egypt. And therefore, the matzah is a symbol of the Exodus, of freedom, of redemption. And here it's the bread of affliction. Before I answer that question, let me share with you part of what I find a remarkable and relevant teaching of the Hasidic master, the Sfat Emet. It's Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter, who lived, just to give you some time perspective, from 1847 to 1905. Like many traditional teachers, he's known by the book he wrote, the Sfat Emet, the language of truth. In one of his teachings, he asks the question, if you had to summarize what Torah is about, what Judaism is about, in one word, what would that word would be? And I thought about asking you to give answers, but I ask you instead, if everybody just think for a moment, if you had to summarize it in one word, 2 words, there's no exam, doesn't matter. Just, okay, so 5 seconds. Remember, you answer, but don't show it to me. It's like a card trick. So his answer is that the one word is freedom. The whole Torah is about freedom, which I found as an astonishing answer. So I'll share with you part of his teaching. The purpose of all the mitzvot, all the commandments, both positive and negative, that were given to the Jewish people is so that each of us can be free. That is why the Exodus, the liberation from Egypt, had to precede the giving of the Torah at Sinai. You couldn't have Sinai without the Exodus, without people being free. And the Torah then, the Torah at Sinai, teaches the soul how to maintain its freedom. A Jew has to be free in soul and in body. This is the purpose of the entire Torah. That is why the rabbis, and here he's quoting Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Ancestors, read the verse, Charut al Haluchot, which means literally from the book of Exodus, describing the tablets, engraved. Charut, the letters were engraved on the tablets. The 10 Commandments were engraved on the tablets. The rabbis read it instead of charut as cherut. Cherut is freedom. Freedom on the tablets. And they added, the only free person is the one who is engaged in Torah. For Torah teaches a person the way to freedom. The Sfat Emet believes that there are things that get in the way of our freedom. Some are things that can limit our freedom over which we have very little control, whether it's poverty or illness or other things like that. His focus then is on the spiritual and emotional challenges that can keep us stuck. The voice within you that says, you can't do that, or change isn't possible, or worse, the voice that says, you are just a failure, or no one likes you, or you are someone who's caught up in envy and jealousy, or you live a life of dissatisfaction with what you have, never being satisfied. All of these can be obstacles to realizing the potential that you do have. Freedom is being able to achieve as much of that potential as possible. Freedom is about living a life of caring about others and about God's creation. Freedom is about striving to end each day as did God during creation by saying, Ki tov, I did good today, at least a little bit. The Seder then begins with halachma, this is the bread of affliction, to remind us that despite the Exodus, we are not free. However, the importance of the story of the Exodus is to remind us that once we were slaves and we were freed and can be again. This is not a freedom to do whatever we want, an extreme form of libertarianism. Rather, it is a freedom to live up to our highest expectations and hopes for ourselves. We start the Seder by saying we are slaves because only when you realize that you are a slave in some way can you struggle to change and be free. Only when we realize that the promised land lies ahead can we move closer to it. Only when we realize that there are too many people who are going to bed hungry can we know we must cry out loud, Kol dichvin yete v'yechol. Let us feed everyone who is hungry. And even more importantly, Kol ditzrich, those who are in need emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually, need to vayivtzach, know the deepest truth of Passover, that people can become free. Your fate isn't inexorable, that we are all created in the image of God, and therefore we all deserve to be free. Halachma is a reminder to us that we live in an unredeemed world, and we must offer hope to those less fortunate than we are. After all, the most repeated commandment in the Torah is to remember you were strangers in the land of Egypt, never forgetting that experience. We must offer a zroa netuyah, an outstretched arm of compassion, helping to lift people up. The rabbis who constructed the Seder wanted to remind us of the importance of our story of freedom. In order to help us engage in that process, we are not supposed to just tell the tale of the Exodus, but to experience slavery and freedom in our bodies by eating foods of sweetness and foods of bitterness. In my recent book, Judaism Disrupted, a spiritual manifesto for the 21st century, quite a mouthful of a topic, I suggest that there is a mistaken notion in the organized Jewish community that Judaism is about being a good Jew, meaning doing the distinctly Jewish rituals such as lighting Shabbat candles, keeping kosher, etc., etc. I believe that actually Judaism is about taking the most precious gift that each of us has been given, which is our lives, and with the teachings and practices of Judaism, live those lives with purpose and with meaning. I suggest redefining ritual as awareness practice, reminding us of the inner qualities that we want to cultivate in our lives: compassion, gratitude, satisfaction, generosity, and more. Specifically, Passover asks us to examine our lives and our worlds and focus on freedom. Freedom for ourselves, for our family and friends, freedom for our communities and country, and freedom for the world. This year, as we look at the world, much of what we hold dear seems to be threatened. I want to encourage you to use the opportunity of the Seder to do two things. One, tell the story of your own family's journey, perhaps itself a journey of freedom from somewhere else to America, or even just stories of your ancestors who are no longer with us that you want to make sure the next generation knows of them. And two, and most of all, encourage questions. Perhaps asking all your guests to come with a question as a ticket to your Seder. The traditional 4 questions really were meant to be sample questions, not really meant to be learned by every Hebrew school child and reflect how well the Hebrew school is teaching your kids. So let me suggest 4 questions that you might want to ask and discuss at your Seder. What does it mean that we welcome all 4 children to the Seder? How do we respond to the questions? I like to call that child the challenging child rather than the wicked child. How do we respond to the questions of the challenging child? How do we engage those who seem seemingly indifferent, who don't want to ask questions? How do we listen to each other respectfully so that everyone feels free to express their opinions? How do we express those opinions, not so easy, without being hurtful to others? Second question, must freedom for some people always come at the expense of another people? Is it ever possible to achieve what the rabbis call mishpat shalom, a justice of peace where everyone wins? 3, does more freedom mean I have fewer restrictions on what I can do? Can I do whatever I want, obviously with some limits? Or does freedom mean I am free to fulfill my obligations to society? And finally, 4, excuse me, Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke of 4 freedoms, a good number for the Seder, right? For everything in the Seder. 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Notice that 2 are freedom of and 2 are freedom from. Would you add any other freedoms to that list? One often forgotten is that FDR understood that freedom from want meant more than having enough to eat. As it is written in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I quote, "Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself, and of her family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social service." Each year, Passover asks us to echo Abraham Lincoln's words calling for a new birth of freedom. How is this year's Seder different from all other Seders? It needs to be a rebirth of freedom. Shabbat Shalom.